Welcome to Applying Project Management in the Real World. If you've joined us for this program's previous courses, then you've developed a solid foundation of project management knowledge and skills. Those courses covered how a project progresses through the initiation, planning, execution, and closing stages. They also taught how to manage projects using different methodologies and approaches, like Agile and Scrum. If you haven't completed the previous courses, we recommend checking them out before starting this course to ensure that you're ready to work through all of the upcoming activities. As you progress through this course, you'll create project documents based on an imagined scenario. You'll learn details through conversations, emails, and other materials just as you would in a real-world scenario. By the end of this course, you'll have developed a portfolio of project management documents that will demonstrate your ability to manage stakeholders and teams, organize plans, and communicate project details. All of this can be valuable when applying for jobs or working on projects in your current line of work. Before we go any further, I want to take a few minutes to introduce myself. My name is Dan, and I'm a program manager here at Google, and I'll be your instructor for this course. At Google, I work on a team that promotes responsible practices in designing, building, and applying artificial intelligence, also known as AI, and machine learning. I support teams in adopting tools and techniques they can use to evaluate their machine learning models and determine whether they're performing equitably. I love this role because I get to support teams in building products that work for our users. Before my current role, I worked on the Google AI Residency Program team. This is a rotational program for people who are interested in doing AI research, but who come from non-traditional backgrounds. This work was compelling to me because I personally didn't have any experience with AI or machine learning before coming to Google. This just goes to show that if you have strong project management skills, you often don't need to be a subject matter expert in a given domain to work in that field. Prior to my time at Google, I worked outside of tech, first as a math teacher and then as a sponsorship coordinator for a professional soccer team. Throughout my career, I've always been passionate about education, whether that's teaching students in the classroom or teaching developers how to ethically implement AI systems. So I'm pretty excited about leading you through this course. It should be a lot of fun. Now let's get right into the scenario that will apply to all of the activities in this course. In this imagined scenario, a small restaurant chain called Sauce and Spoon wants to meet their annual growth and expansion goals. As one way to meet these goals, they've decided to launch a pilot project to test out the impact of installing new tabletop menu tablets. The new menu tablets will allow the restaurant to serve more guests in less time, and will provide valuable data that will help Sauce and Spoon meet its business goals. The company just hired PETA as their first in-house project manager to oversee the tablet rollout at 2 of the restaurant chain's 5 locations. Throughout the course, you'll observe PETA as she guides her team through planning and executing the project deliverables. Although she has 5 years of project management experience, PETA hasn't managed a restaurant project before. You'll get to follow the project through its life cycle as PETA learns about the restaurant industry, determines the goals of the project, negotiates with stakeholders, and much more. Along the way, you'll record details of the project to use in course activities. You'll also evaluate PETA's project management skills as she works to complete this project in scope, on time, and within budget. You'll learn what works and what doesn't, and how to problem solve your way through a project. As you progress through the course, we'll review and practice key project management concepts, which include analyzing materials to identify project requirements, solve problems, and manage stakeholders, applying important negotiation techniques and influencing skills, listening with empathy when working with a team, and practicing your stakeholder communication skills. We'll explore these concepts in more depth, and I'll explain how each concept applies to the Sauce and Spoon project. Each activity will contain guiding questions to help you create common project documents that you can speak to in a job interview and utilize throughout your career. As you work through these activities, you may want to take notes on some of the information you learn. Feel free to use whichever tool you prefer, whether that's the Coursera note-taking system or another method. In the upcoming videos, I'll explain the project in more detail and share project management best practices so that you can complete the associated course activities. Are you ready? Let's go. You'll analyze project documents and supporting materials to identify project requirements, evaluate stakeholders, and problem solve. You'll use a project charter as a tool to align project scope and goals among stakeholders. And you'll apply effective negotiation skills with stakeholders to prioritize project goals. In this video, I'll review the purpose and main components of a project charter so you can get started creating one for the Sauce and Spoon tablet rollout. After this video, you'll review supporting materials that will enable you to observe Peta as she initiates the project. Then you'll apply strategic thinking to create a project charter based on what you observed. Strategic thinking involves analyzing documentation and talking with stakeholders to inform decisions based on the information available to you. Okay, let's review the purpose and main components of a project charter. A project charter is a formal document that clearly defines the project and outlines the necessary details to reach the project's goals. The project manager creates the charter during the initiation phase, which is the first phase of the project lifecycle. The project charter helps you organize vital project information, create a framework for the work that needs to be done, and communicate those details to the necessary people. It's also useful as a reference throughout the project's lifecycle, since it can help stakeholders realign on the project's scope, goals, and costs. The project charter contains key information about a project, like the summary, goals, and deliverables. The goal of the summary is to provide an overview of the project and to outline the goals you hope to accomplish. Summaries should be brief, just a few sentences at most, and to the point. After the summary comes project goals and deliverables. Project goals refer to the desired results of the project, and deliverables refer to specific tasks and tangible outcomes that enable the team to meet project goals. In general, project goals address the overall result that stakeholders are aiming to achieve. They are determined by input from stakeholders and the project manager. For example, part of Sauce and Spoon's annual growth and expansion goals is launching the tablet rollout project. And one deliverable of the project is the successful installation of working tablets at 2 restaurant locations. The last part of a project charter that we'll cover here is scope. Remember that scope refers to the boundaries of a project. Along with the scope, the charter contains information about work that's out of scope. Details that don't contribute to the project's goals are considered out of scope. Scope was covered in a previous course, and I'll continue to discuss it in more detail in an upcoming video. Let's recap what we just covered. A project charter is a formal document that clearly defines the project and outlines the necessary details to reach the project's goals. The primary components of a project charter are the summary, goals, deliverables, and scope. A charter can include other sections as well, such as budget and cost, and success metrics. In this video, we'll discuss how to use the charter as a tool to get the project's stakeholders in alignment about the project's scope and goals. Then, in the upcoming activity, you'll review supporting materials containing information about the Sauce and Spoon tablet rollout. You'll also observe how Peta guides a conversation among disagreeing stakeholders to get alignment on the project charter details. Then, you'll identify key aspects of the conversation that will help you revise and clarify details in the charter you drafted in the last activity. Let's get into it. Anytime you're communicating the details of your project, you need to think about your audience and what information is important to them. When adding details to a project charter, ask yourself the following questions about your audience, and if it's helpful, try answering these questions in your notes. Who are your stakeholders? In this case, your audience includes all of your key stakeholders. What details are most important to them? Are there project details that they might disagree with? Once you've identified what you believe are important details, review your charter and ensure all of those details are included. From there, you'll be able to present the charter to your stakeholders and confirm that everyone agrees with the project information. Think of the project charter this way. In addition to serving as a formal document that defines the project, a project charter is also an alignment tool. Here, alignment refers to reaching agreement between 2 or more parties. A common cause of project failure is misalignment among stakeholders about the details of the project. Misalignment can also happen between you and your stakeholders when you have differing visions for the project. That's why it's so important to align with your stakeholders before the work begins. Stakeholders generally aren't involved in the day-to-day tasks of project executions, so it's crucial to take time during the initiation phase to create a project charter that clearly lays out the details of a project. This helps ensure that the team is working toward the outcomes expected by all of the stakeholders, and not just some of them. Usually, the initiation phase is the most ideal time to make changes to the project. As the project progresses into the planning and execution phases, substantive changes might require undoing work that's already been completed. So in this early phase of the project lifecycle, you shouldn't be afraid to make adjustments. Here's an example of how you might experience misalignment. Let's say you're discussing the main goals of the Sauce and Spoon project. One stakeholder has a vision of being able to fully automate the ordering experience with the tablets over time. Another stakeholder has a different goal. Rather than fully automating ordering, they want the tablet rollout project to improve order accuracy. To help resolve this situation, a project manager might facilitate a discussion between the two stakeholders to try and reach an agreement to confirm alignment on the project's goals. When you present a project charter to your stakeholders, it's important to collect feedback and identify where there are misalignments. Then, you can make changes to address those misalignments. If you and your stakeholders take the time early on to clearly define the project, then you're much more likely to deliver the outcomes your stakeholders expect at the end of the project. As a project manager, it's important to record the feedback you receive and document any misalignments and their resolutions. This allows you and your project team to reference those decisions later on. One way to document misalignments and resolutions is to create an appendix with a timestamp for new or updated information. An appendix is a section of additional content at the end of a document. A timestamp includes the date and sometimes the time of when the new content was created or added to the document. Awesome. Let's review some of the main ideas we've discussed. Anytime you communicate the details of a project, you need to think about your audience and what information is important to them. In the case of a project charter, your audience is made up of your stakeholders. A common cause of project failure is misalignment among stakeholders about the project details. It's important to take the time during the initiation phase to create a project charter that clearly lays out the key details of a project and to align with your stakeholders before the work begins. And finally, document any misalignments and their resolutions in your notes and the project charter to reference later on. By now, you've drafted the project summary, goals, and deliverables in the project charter. And you've identified details in the project charter where stakeholders need to be in alignment. In this video, I'll review SMART goals and discuss how to add specificity to your project goals. I'll also share some tips for researching industry success metrics, which are helpful in adding specificity to your goals and deliverables. Being able to write specific, measurable goals is an important part of project management and a great way to demonstrate your project management skills to potential employers. Then, in the following activity, you'll review supporting materials and update the goals and deliverables you've drafted in the project charter to make them SMART. Ready to begin? Let's go. During the initiation phase, some of the project goals might be broad because not all of the project details have been determined. While it's okay to have broader goals, it's helpful to add specificity where possible. That's because clarifying project goals early on can help you avoid misalignment and gain a clearer understanding of the project's scope, budget, and timeline. Remember, project goals are the desired outcomes of the project. Outlining clear and specific goals is an important step in creating an effective project charter and crucial to launching a successful project. So you'll need to be able to accurately identify whether or not a goal has been met. When your goals are clear, you'll be able to determine your project deliverables. Project deliverables are specific tasks or outcomes that contribute to the completion of a goal. In your career as a project manager, you'll likely encounter stakeholders who only vaguely describe the outcomes they want for a given project. For example, a stakeholder might tell you that they'd like more customers to use a certain service, or they'd like to sell more units of a particular product. These are fine goals, but they're not very specific. You don't know how many more customers, what kind of customers, or how many units that you'll need in order to meet your goals. As a project manager, it's your role to ensure that the project goals are well defined so that you and your team have a clear roadmap. This not only allows you to focus, but also eliminates wasted time and miscommunication going forward. You can create clearly outlined goals with the help of the SMART method we discussed earlier in this program. The SMART method helps turn your project goals into SMART goals. Remember, this means your goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. These qualities can help you measure your success more accurately and allow you to make more precise adjustments along the way. Let's review some best practices for ensuring your project goals are also SMART goals. To make a goal more specific, make sure that it provides answers to questions like, what am I aiming to accomplish? And what are the requirements and constraints of this goal? Here's a tip I like to use to add specificity to goals. Look for words in your goals that might be subjective or based on an opinion, such as bigger, better, or faster. Once you've identified subjective words, connect with your stakeholders to agree on a definition of what it actually means to make something bigger, or better, or faster. What does bigger or better entail in practice? Faster by how much specifically? The SMART method helps you make your goals more specific by making them measurable. For example, if your stakeholder wants to increase company profits, ask, by how much? Do they want to increase profits by 5%? By 30%? Adding numbers and figures to your goal makes it a lot easier to know when you've achieved it. If you're having trouble making a goal measurable, research how others in your industry quantify success. This is called benchmarking, which refers to evaluating success against a standard. For example, there are lots of ways to measure success in the restaurant industry. You might search online for information using queries like, how do restaurants measure success? Or, how do you evaluate employee training sessions? You'll likely find a number of results. Some common metrics include table turnover rate, or the average length of time that a guest spends at their table, prime cost, which is the labor cost plus the total cost of goods like food and drink, and average check amount, which is the average amount of money guests spend on a given meal. Most industries, from the hospitality industry to the entertainment industry to the construction industry, will have their own metrics for success. That includes the tech industry too. Metrics are a big part of how we measure success here at Google. SMART goals are also attainable, which means that the goal is challenging but not impossible to reach. Ask yourself and the team, can it be done? Do you have the time, resources, and people available to complete the goal on time and within budget? If not, you'll need to make some changes to your goals. And all project goals should be relevant. Ask yourself, does it make sense for us as a company or as a project team to pursue this goal? One best practice for determining the relevance of your project goals is to notice how closely your project goals align with the wider goals of your company or organization. Here at Google, we use a tool for organization-wide goal setting called Objectives and Key Results, or OKRs. Other organizations might use a different term for their own goal setting. For us, OKRs combine a goal and a metric to determine a measurable outcome. For example, one of Sauce and Spoon's broader objectives is to make fresh, quick food for the working families in its community. So a relevant goal for the Sauce and Spoon tablet rollout might be to decrease customer checkout time by 10% on average in the first 6 weeks after implementation. This project goal helps the restaurant chain reach its larger goal to provide quick meals for guests. And the last part of the SMART framework is to make your goal time-bound. You'll want to add a deadline to your goal so that you know when it's supposed to be completed. Okay, let's review. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. If your goals are SMART, you can feel confident about including them in your project charter. In the upcoming activity, you'll collect information from the supporting materials that will help you turn the goals you drafted into SMART goals. You'll also identify any additional goals and add them to the project charter. Now that you've updated the project charter and edited some of the project goals to make them SMART, it's time to discuss scope, benefits, and cost. Coming up, we'll explore what to think about when adding these items to your project charter. After this video, you'll review new supporting materials and use what you've learned to identify benefits and costs which you'll add to your charter. Let's get started. When thinking about what kind of information to include in a project charter, It's always good to consider the primary audience who will be reading it. And since the goal of creating a project charter is to communicate with your stakeholders, they're your primary audience. Here's an example. If you know that one of the benefits of your project would be of particular interest to a key stakeholder, you'll want to make sure to emphasize this benefit in your project charter. The stakeholders reading your charter might not see more detailed project plans and other documents later on, so it's important to get consensus on the critical elements now while the project details are still being finalized. You've already identified and hopefully resolved any misalignments about the project vision and goals. Next, you need to get aligned with your stakeholders on scope, benefits, and cost. We talked about scope earlier, but as a quick refresher, scope refers to the boundaries of the project. For example, the number of restaurants taking part in the pilot. Details that don't contribute to the project's goals are considered out of scope. To determine what's in and out of scope, think about what's needed to achieve the project goal. Keep the following questions in mind. Which project details are your stakeholders aligned on that would be considered in scope? Do your stakeholders disagree on any elements? Are there any details you should designate as out of scope for this particular project? As you think about these questions, take notes on what you find and refer to them as you complete the scope section of your project charter in the upcoming activity. After you've figured out the scope of your project, you'll need to focus on project benefits and costs. Benefits are the expected gains of a project. These can be direct monetary gains or indirect benefits, like an improvement in customer engagement or satisfaction. Costs refer to the money spent on project tasks and the prices of things like time, resources, and labor. Costs can be evaluated and managed using a project budget. A budget is an estimate of the amount of money allocated to complete the project. In the next activity, you'll need to review the supporting materials and take notes on details that can help you identify the benefits and costs of the tablet rollout. You'll use that information to add two lists to your project charter, a list of benefits and a list of costs. Usually, you can find the benefits the project will bring in the business case or project proposal. For example, your list of benefits for the tablet rollout might include its potential to speed up service and increase sales by an estimated %. Here's another benefit. The tablets will provide the restaurant with clear data points on customer ordering and an integrated point-of-sale system to help guide decision-making in the future. A list of benefits can help you identify potential project goals you might have missed. A list of costs will include items the organization will have to pay for in order to get the job done, like the price of labor or materials. Listing out costs helps your stakeholders weigh the benefits against the amount of money required to realize those benefits. You can build a list of costs by working with stakeholders to get estimates on labor, materials, and any other factors that might cost the business money during the project. Earlier, I told you that the benefits of a project should outweigh the costs. This is almost always the case when a project is initiated or proposed. When you add these details to the charter, it helps visualize them in one place and makes the costs and benefits crystal clear to the stakeholders. This section is used a lot as an aid to help make sure stakeholders agree that it's worth the money to pursue the project. Okay, let's recap. Scope refers to the boundaries of the project. Benefits refer to the expected gains of the project. And costs refer to the money spent on project tasks, plus the prices of things like time, resources, and labor. Ready to get back to your project charter? Head over to the activity where you'll review and analyze the supporting materials to identify the appropriate scope, benefits, and costs for the Sauce and Spoon tablet rollout. Then, meet me in the next video where we'll discuss techniques for negotiating with stakeholders. By now, you've filled in most of your project charter, the summary, goals, and deliverables, scope, benefits, and costs. You've also learned more about the project and your stakeholders, who are the core audience of the charter. In this video, you'll learn how to prepare for some of the negotiations you'll have with stakeholders about your projects. We'll spend some time exploring stakeholders' individual interests, involvement, and contributions to the project. Then, we'll figure out how to use stakeholder influence to benefit the project and how to effectively work with stakeholders. Almost every part of a project requires input and agreement from multiple stakeholders. And of course, not all stakeholders will value the same input or agree on the same things. That's why a successful project manager needs to be a skilled negotiator too. After this video, you'll review supporting materials about the Sauce and Spoon project stakeholders to write a persuasive email demonstrating your negotiation skills. Let's get started. As we discussed earlier in the program, some common project aspects that are negotiated during the course of a project include scope, costs and benefits, timeline, success criteria, roles and responsibilities, and resources. This is another reason getting aligned with stakeholders early on is helpful. Good alignment can help prevent some of these types of negotiations down the road. Early in the project, it's important to agree on the scope. Take note of how PETA focuses on securing stakeholder buy-in for that. And it's good to remember that a lot of the skills she'll apply here will be useful to negotiating other elements throughout the project's lifecycle, whether that's the budget, timeline, or product requirements. You'll prepare for this and future negotiations by creating a stakeholder analysis. A stakeholder analysis is a visual representation of all of the stakeholders. It helps you understand who your stakeholders are, what their priorities are, and how they prefer to communicate. It can help you determine how strongly you need to prioritize a particular stakeholder's needs or goals on the project. Stakeholders have a vested interest in the project's success. Understanding your stakeholders helps you figure out the right people to include in important conversations and how to prioritize the different needs of the different stakeholders. This is key to getting the support you need throughout the project. As part of your analysis, try to answer as many questions as you can about each stakeholder. Then, as you review your list, identify which stakeholders directly influence the project and the level of interest each one has. A stakeholder's influence is related to how much power they have and how much their actions affect the project outcome. Interest refers to how much the stakeholder's needs will be affected by project operations and outcomes. So for example, if a stakeholder has high interest and high influence, it might be very important that you keep them informed and make sure their goals for the project are top priority. If they have low interest and low influence, then you might be able to deprioritize one of their personal preferences for the project. Mapping these out on a power interest grid will give you even more clarity about whom to prioritize and how best to approach negotiations with each stakeholder. You'll find a stakeholder analysis template in Power Interest Grid in the supporting materials of the upcoming activity. Once you have a good idea of who your stakeholders are and what role they play in the project's success, you can use this information to support your project negotiations. One of the most important negotiations will deal with defining and maintaining project scope. Stakeholders might push to add more into the scope, and it's your job as the project manager to negotiate what's realistic within the given budget and timeline expectations. Okay, let's review. Some common project negotiations you're likely to have with stakeholders include aspects of the charter, like costs and benefits and success criteria, as well as other project aspects, like roles and responsibilities and project resources. You can prepare for these negotiations by conducting a stakeholder analysis using a Power Interest Grid. Coming up, you'll review supporting materials and complete a stakeholder analysis for the Sauce and Spoon tablet rollout. In the last activity, you completed the stakeholder analysis and mapped out which stakeholders have the most power, influence, and interest in the project's outcome. Having a better understanding of the people who will be evaluating the success of your project makes it so much easier to strategize the best ways to communicate with them and get the support you need. So coming up, we'll learn more about how to successfully navigate a negotiation with stakeholders. As a project manager, you've got a lot of helpful tools at your disposal, but even the most skilled negotiators have to put their skills to the test in order to meet project goals and gain stakeholder satisfaction. There will be times when you need to negotiate a sensitive aspect of the project's goals or scope. Or there could be a disagreement among stakeholders, or you might disagree with something that stakeholders want. You'll need to use negotiating techniques to move a disagreement from stalemate to solution. After this video, you'll identify shared benefits for your stakeholders that you'll eventually use to write a negotiation email. Let's get started. When it comes to project management, Persuasion and negotiation are constructive tools you can use to enhance communication, clarify wants and needs, and achieve workable solutions for everyone involved. Being skilled at persuasion and negotiation will also boost your level of influence. It's important that you view the people you're negotiating with as your colleagues and peers, not as opponents. That's why you do a stakeholder analysis, so you can get to know your stakeholders as people with their own jobs and responsibilities, and as partners who want the project to succeed. When you experience conflict or disagreement among your stakeholders, it's in your best interest to address those challenges, build consensus among the stakeholder groups, and de-escalate conflict. One way to do this is to find solutions that are mutually beneficial. Mutual benefit is when all parties involved gain some kind of benefit or advantage. For example, let's say there's a disagreement over how many people to hire for a project. You'd like to hire 5, but a stakeholder wants to limit the headcount to 3. A solution that would offer mutual benefit might be to install automated software to pick up some of the work. Or another solution might be to adjust the timeline or expectations so that 5 people aren't needed in order to reach the project goal. The stakeholder gets to have their desired smaller team size, and you're able to complete tasks with fewer people. The goal here is to reach a solution that maximizes benefits, minimizes losses, and is fair for all. Brainstorm all possible options that meet this criteria. Then, during your negotiations, you'll be able to present multiple alternatives and choose one that benefits everyone to some degree. Now, as much as you want to satisfy your stakeholders, it's just as important to think about what trade-offs you're willing to make. To do this successfully, you need a clear understanding of project priorities. You have to know what's most important when it comes to scope, timeline, and budget. For example, if there's a specific deadline that has to be met, then you'll need to negotiate any changes to the scope that might cause the project to go past that deadline. If the product needs to look or function a certain way, then the requirements are a top priority, and you could negotiate aspects of the budget or timeline in order to adhere to the scope. A common tool used for determining priorities is the triple constraint model, or the iron triangle, which we covered in an earlier course. The triple constraint will help you decide if a project request is acceptable and what impact it'll have. Okay, let's review. Persuasion and negotiation are constructive tools you can use to enhance communication, clarify wants and needs, and achieve workable solutions for everyone involved. The goal is to reach a mutual benefit, which is when all parties involved gain some kind of benefit or advantage. That's it for now. Coming up, you'll prepare for negotiations about the project scope. To do this, you'll identify the mutual benefits and evaluate the impact of compromising on scope. So far, you've identified mutual benefits and their impacts to scope, timeline, and budget. In this video, you'll learn how to apply influence and constructive-powered stakeholder negotiations. Then, you'll use this knowledge to identify stakeholders who'd be helpful in supporting your position in upcoming negotiations. We talked earlier about how the ability to influence is such a key element of effective project management. You might remember an earlier video where we covered 4 steps to effective influencing. Dr. Jay Conger lists these 4 steps to effectively influence: establish credibility, frame for common ground, provide evidence, and connect emotionally. One way to apply all 4 of these steps is to form a coalition. A coalition is a temporary alliance or partnering of individuals or groups in order to achieve a common purpose or to engage in a joint activity. When 2 or more people advocate together for an idea, they're able to exert more influence than if they attempted to act alone. Forming a coalition with the right group of people is a powerful and effective negotiation technique. For example, think about some of the key stakeholders you identified earlier from the Sauce and Spoon project. Which ones could you form a coalition with to help you negotiate one of the out-of-scope items that was requested? Creating a coalition boosts your credibility by involving others who support your goal. The people in your coalition can help you find common ground and provide evidence. Plus, you can connect emotionally by including someone who either has a positive relationship with the stakeholder or understands the stakeholder and the goal well enough to make a connection. An effective coalition includes people with the right mix of influence or power and interest. In other words, identify people who can help you achieve your goal through their vested interest and expertise on the subject of your project. You'll also want to balance your coalition with people who have a high level of power in your organization to help influence and get things done. A stakeholder analysis is a useful tool to help guide coalition building. Once you've decided who's a good fit for your coalition, reach out to them and ask for their support. A good way to do this is through a well-crafted email, but you could also ask in person or with a phone call, whichever method you think is most appropriate. When you make your request, clearly state the issue you're attempting to resolve. Explain which aspect of the project is being negotiated. Then, ask if they might consider supporting your position or solution and state what that is. And of course, refer to that person's sources of power or interest you identified. For example, if you're negotiating the timing of the project, you might say something like, "The timing of the launch will affect business hours, and your experience managing restaurant projects year-round could be helpful in explaining why this factor needs to be reconsidered." This will let them know that you value them, why it impacts them, and why you think they can be of specific help to you. Let's recap the main ideas. The ability to influence is a big part of project management. There are 4 steps to effective influencing as identified by Dr. J. Conger. Establish credibility, frame for common ground, provide evidence, and connect emotionally. One way to gain influence is to form a coalition. A coalition is a temporary alliance or partnering of groups in order to achieve a common purpose or to engage in a joint activity. An effective coalition includes people with the right mix of power and interest. You'll want to play to those strengths when forming a coalition and influencing members of the coalition. Great. Now you've prepared for future negotiations. Up next, you'll use what you learned about coalition building and write a persuasive email to influence these stakeholders to join the coalition.
Congratulations on finishing this video in the Google Project Management Certificate. Access the full learning experience, including job search help, and start to earn your official certificate by clicking on the icon. To view the next course in this video, click here and subscribe to our channel to learn more from Google Career Certificates.